Asia Tech Podcast with Graham Brown and Michael Waits.
Hello and welcome to Asia Tech Podcast. My name is Graham Brown. We are all about the stories that make the Asian tech ecosystem so exciting, so dynamic. At the cutting edge of that tech ecosystem, joined by a guest today, Bob Gallagher, who's going to tell us a little bit about his story, how he made the journey to Thailand, where he's based now in Bangkok, how he set up his mobile growth agency, AppSynth, the challenges that he's faced in doing that. And also he's seen a lot of changes. I mean, he's been in Thailand for what, 7, 8, 9 years now? So he's seen a lot of change. He was there before the startup scene. Everybody talks about Thailand now as the next big thing in the startup ecosystem, but he was there before that. So he's seen a lot of change. So we want to learn a bit about that, why he made the move, and also apps. So he spends his days advising corporates on their mobile app strategies, how to get the most out of their app portfolios. So we can learn a lot in the next hour. Bob Gallagher, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Graham. Great to be here.
Excellent to have you here. Where do we start? I think we've got to start by looking at your journey, Bob. So you're in Bangkok today. You've been there for 8, 9 years. It's coming up to 9 years.
Yeah, it's coming up to 9. Yeah.
So you arrived in you arrived September 2008?
Correct. Yeah. So, I guess we could start with what I was doing at that point in time. So I was actually head of music for a mobile content distributor. So I was based in London and working with all of the big independent record labels in the UK and distributing their kind of music content, video content to telcos. So at that time, I was personally heading up all the relationships with UK telcos, but we also had a team out in KL that was handling kind of Asian business. So I'd kind of been dealing with the team out in Asia. I'd had the opportunity to kind of come and visit and do a little bit of business in this part of the world, and also just having been kind of out of backpacking and doing that kind of thing, and just really fell in love with the place and decided that actually why not, if possible, try and spend a bit longer and actually see what life would be like out in this part of the world.
Yeah, I mean, that's fascinating. The way you put it, like, why not see if you can make something out of it? I mean, back then you were 23, is that correct?
That's correct, yeah.
Right, so a lot of people backpack around Southeast Asia. Now we're sort of seeing a shift where a lot of people are setting up and staying a little longer in places like Chiang Mai, up in the north of Thailand, right? That seems to attract people who have backpacked, but they kind of want to live that digital nomad lifestyle and so on. So there's a bit more of a less transient community moving around Southeast Asia at that time. But when you came here in 2008, that already hadn't started yet, has it? I mean, Tim Ferriss had just written the 4-hour work week, so people didn't really know about that kind of lifestyle. It was still backpacking, wasn't it? It was still the thing that people did.
Right. And to be honest, I mean, I wasn't in backpacker mode at that point. That had come a few years earlier, and I was 2 years into kind of this role at this mobile company. But I guess before joining that company, I'd always had the thoughts of coming and spending maybe a year, 6 months somewhere like Thailand, and but ended up actually landing this pretty good, pretty interesting job. I mean, I have to say it was a great time going to record label pre-release kind of gigs every couple of days, and seeing up and coming acts before they were known by kind of the masses. So I was actually having a really great time in that role. But on coming out to Asia and doing another visit, I realized I was kind of at risk of giving up my dream of doing that, because I just felt the longer I did spend in London, probably the better and better and the more stable things would get there, and eventually it might become one of those things that I never did. So I actually went to my boss and just pitched him and said, look, I think I could do most of my job remotely, and we do business in Asia. We've done kind of some work with True and distributed to some of the telcos here, and I just said, look, basically I'm going, whether or not we can come to some arrangement, but I'd love to continue doing what I'm doing, and if at any point you think I'm not able to do the job as well as I have been, then then let me know. But if you'll kind of accept this kind of test and let me go and try and do it all from Thailand, I'd really love to do that. And fortunately had a very open-minded boss who was cool with that. So I actually moved to Thailand and did that for another year remotely. And at the same time, I actually was doing an MBA online with a university back in the UK. So it allowed me to kind of reduce my hours a bit on the work and focus on the studies. And that was kind of around the time when the iPhone and the App Store had come out. And I'd been working in music even before this role. So I actually I didn't go to uni, but instead of doing that, I set up a record label when I was 18.
Right.
And,
this needs a lot of context, right? Because did you actually defer going to university, or did you say, right, no, I have the choice to go to university, I'm going to set up a record label? Can you just understand that a little bit?
Sure. So, I mean, I started the label out of college, and, you know, it was an extension of a hobby, and there were people around me that I thought were making good music, and we wanted to start putting on nights, as many people kind of 18 do. But we actually, on putting on some events, realized that actually a lot of the producers and people we were booking didn't have any representation. They were people that at least were known to me, but so it was actually, at the time it was hip hop. I grew up loving hip hop, and we were putting on hip hop events, and realized that actually there's people that within the UK scene were big names, but they didn't have anyone backing them. And we actually managed to sign someone who at that time was the kind of the BBC One Extra flagship hip hop DJ, a guy called Skits. And it just really switched it from being, oh, this is a hobby and something I just want to pursue out of passion, to thinking, wow, actually we realistically could make a proper go of this. And so it was a conscious decision to actually pursue that and move to London, which, you know, I'm from Southampton, but London was definitely where we needed to be to do this kind of business. And so I did that, and it was after about a year of doing that this other company approached us to license, this distributor approached us to license and distribute our content, and I ended up taking a role with them and running the business kind of on my own, the label on the side.
So when you set up this label, Bob, do you have any idea what was involved in actually setting up a record label? Because everybody knows record labels. Everybody knows the names that you can mention, like the big majors and so on. And they kind of know what they do, but actually running one, do you have any idea? Did you have any experience about what that would entail?
Yeah, I knew absolutely nothing. And, you know, this was for sure the most I learned in any kind of short period of time in my life was those 3 years. And it was really learning business. You know, instead of having gone and studied a degree, I went and did a business. And in the end, it wasn't kind of, you know, financially viable to keep doing for the amount of time and effort I was putting in. But I learned absolutely everything about how to run a business, and obviously specifically how to run a label. And really just learning by doing, and, you know, making stupid mistakes and hopefully not making those again. But it was eye-opening. I mean, it was kind of, we're just so in at the deep end, but just kind of thriving and realizing we could just do it. And like I said, it was that kind of real eye-opening moment to realize that you can actually just approach certain businesses and certain people and just start doing these things and not have to have funding, not have to have you know, a loan or anything to get going, and just go and do it.
Right. I want to talk about your progression to Asia in a minute. This story about you setting up a record label is fascinating to me, because you did it in such a young age, really. I mean, you're 18 years old, and you know, I imagine people around you were going to college, were going to university, right? So that was kind of the done thing. That's a default, really, isn't it, for that age group? That's what you do. So obviously, you know, people similar kind of age who went to college, and, you know, they went and did all their thing after university and so on. I know we want to talk about advice later on, but I'm just curious about, in this context, is that, you know, when you see friends who've gone through university and started their careers, and you see the path that you have taken, Would you do the same again, knowing what you know now? Because I know you said you've also done an online MBA, so you felt at some point you needed to get some kind of, I don't know, theory in what you're doing, or some kind of intellectual architecture in what you're doing. So is that kind of the right way to do it? Would you advise somebody in that situation, say, yeah, okay, that's an option? Or would you say, hey, wait a second, learn from my mistakes? How would you advise somebody?
I mean, I think that there will have been mistakes that I could have avoided if I had got some of that theory down first. And I think I would have at least, looking back to speaking to my younger self, have, encouraged myself to study business at college and at least have some grounding. But I think I would recommend the uni route, just because I think that there's probably the rate of learning in doing is so much higher, but actually if that had come directly after uni rather than before uni, then it probably would have been from a more informed starting point. But at the same time, then you don't have any rules to tell you how you do it, and maybe some of the opportunities we were able to make happen might not have if we'd delayed and actually gone and studied. And so I think it was right for me at the time, and but then going to actually do the MBA was my way of doing it in the reverse order and thinking, okay, I do want to start another business. I've learned from my mistakes, but now let's also learn from others and get some firmer kind of fundamentals there, so that the next business is, rather than it being out of passion, which the first one was, and I don't think there was anything wrong with that, but also being smarter the second time around.
Yeah, very interesting and wise words as well. So you moved to Thailand. Let's just go back through that again so people can understand of the chronology of Bob Gallagher, how it works. So you moved to Thailand in 2008 when you were 23, right? And you were still working for the company that you had sort of moved to from the record label. Yep. And you'd pitched your boss. He said yes to the idea. You moved out there for a year so you could do this work remotely, and you were studying as well at the same time. Yep. So you had this sort of transition period. And then in 2010, you set up AppSynth. So tell us a little bit about that transition. So you're in a foreign country, you're setting yourself up, and to move to a foreign country itself is a challenge. I mean, I've moved all over the place in the world, but after like 4 or 5 times, it gets kind of easier, but it's always difficult. But then to set up a business in a foreign country, that's sort of a double challenge. So tell us a little bit about that progression from 2008 to 2010. You're sort of moving away from the payroll, so you're getting paid from this company, and then you're sort of looking at starting your own thing. Tell us about the thought processes going on at the time.
Yeah, so I guess doing the MBA at that point really got kind of the mental juices flowing, and really just thinking of what comes after this, and knowing that it would be wanting to do my own thing. My thesis was actually focused on entrepreneurship in Japan and assessing kind of the opportunity of going and starting a mobile business in Japan. So I'd actually had, at that point in time, had kind of my sights on perhaps relocating that way. But as I worked through that and I began to explore, the local scene more, realized that, Thailand actually seemed like it could be a great opportunity, and to really kind of, rather than start afresh all over again, that perhaps it would be wiser to stay where I was. And I thought that bootstrapping in a place like Thailand, you can obviously go quite a bit further with lower costs. I probably wouldn't have so much runway if I was trying to do that in Tokyo. So it was, I think part of the process was about deciding, is Thailand actually somewhere that registering a business I can do easily enough and not have to, and do it in the proper way, and make sure that I still actually have the ownership of my business, and so just learning about the rules and things like that, and then knowing, secondly, is there the right kind of talent pool or the types of people that I could work with to build a successful business. And at that point in time was really not there wasn't much of a startup scene, so it was hard to gauge that. And that was kind of one of my big concerns, was like, well, maybe, I know a couple of people, but what if we want to scale beyond that? And I think it was, that was probably the main concern. And also just really learning, what should the business be? Because I was coming out of, I actually deliberately wanted to leave music. So as much as I loved it and still love it, I was kind of a bit tired of the industry. And when I first got into mobile, actually mobile was a bit boring. It was websites, it was wallpapers, it was ringtones. And it was only with the kind of advent of the App Store that suddenly, to me, it became so much more, and it could be anything. It's software. It's kind of only limited by imagination. And so this is where I suddenly thought, okay, this is the how mobile gets interesting for me, and this is the business I want to be in. Exactly what within that business? Well, let's kind of discover that. And so I set up AppSynth as a full service mobile agency, and had the view that development would be a key part of that, and we'd want to build apps for clients and maybe for ourselves. But the app marketing was going to be perhaps the kind of the key to this business, because even shortly after the launch of the App Store, it was getting pretty full, pretty hard for new apps to get discovered, and this was only going to be a harder and harder challenge over time. So I thought if we could really crack that and understand what it takes to make an app successful, then that would kind of be the secret sauce of the business. And I figured that every company that did web would soon be doing apps, and eventually kind of development would kind of be a commodity at a certain quality. So having all the other parts that really then make it successful once it's launched, that would be what would differentiate us. So from kind of 2010, when I set up the business, it was a process of discovering, well, okay, so now I know that I want to run an app marketing business. So how do you market apps? Because there was no blueprints. It was a very new store, and the only way to really learn was experimentation. And we really went through, when I say we, it was me, and learning by experimentation what impacts how you rank in the store. How do you increase that ranking? And managed to, I wrote some blog articles. I got contacted by some clients, and they were kind of up for this discovery process together. They knew as much as I did, and they just wanted someone who was kind of passionate to try and discover how to make them more successful. And so this kind of app store optimization, which didn't really have a name at the time, but this process of how do you rank highly, this was really what I focused on at the beginning. And I mean, I truly believe at that point I was probably one of the most experienced in the world at doing this. We had some really huge successes for clients. So before Facebook had an iPad app, one of our clients' apps, which was a photo album for Facebook, it was the top of search for Facebook. Things like that. So we managed to get some really, really popular keywords where relevant for our clients. We managed to get them ranked very highly. And this was kind of what kickstarted the business, because we helped make some other publishers really, really successful. And they made tons of money just by getting this organic exposure, which is obviously very, very hard to do nowadays with even more apps. But it was still tough at that point. And so that kind of validated the business that, okay, we can actually make apps successful. Clients do value it, and obviously will pay for that. And at the same time, I was really just building knowledge of tech, because I was coming from a marketing, a business background. I wasn't a coder, so I really had to learn how to manage software projects, how to really understand the needs of the client, and obviously deliver what they need. So that was also a learning curve. So it was actually about 2 years of me working more like a consultant. Partly it was learning, partly it was getting those first clients up and running, outsourcing some projects, which was quite painful, but at least that also gave me an understanding of what it's like to be on the other side of that. And then this kind of led to the conclusion that it's definitely worth me building a team, but how do I go about it? And this led on to Startup Weekend, which was the very first one in Thailand, was in December 2011.
All right. Well, before we get to Startup Weekend, because that's a story in itself, just backtrack a little bit there, because you mentioned getting clients. You've written blog articles. You've already got success case studies out there that people can relate to. Some fantastic, success stories, like you mentioned with Facebook and the search, for example. So you have that in your portfolio to show people. But even before that had happened, you needed to get your first clients on board. Where were you looking for clients? Were you going back to record labels? I know you said you wanted to move away from music, but your network, because I don't know what it was like back then in Thailand, but I can't imagine there was a lot of Thai companies who were kind of like, biting your arm off to get this App Store optimization. Right. So where were you looking for clients being based in Bangkok? How did you go about that?
Yeah, so actually a lot came to us, I think, just by being one of the first people writing about App Store optimization. We just actually got quite a few inbound leads, and they came from all over. Our first clients were in France and the US and other parts of Europe. Our first development clients were in Hong Kong, and it was through Music Connections, and it was for an upscale nightclub in Hong Kong. But for the marketing, they were actually coming from all over, and I think because we, rather than me, doing outbound sales and knocking on people's doors, they were coming to me, and so already through having read some of the theory I'd written, were kind of convinced that I at least half knew what I was talking about. So it allowed me to be quite open and honest and say, look, there is no blueprint yet, but what we're going to do is basically experiment, and every time you submit a new release to the App Store, we're going to test something different. And so we're going to have a hypothesis. If we do this is the impact we think it might have, and then we're going to measure it. And so working with one publisher in particular that had a portfolio of apps, which meant a steady stream of updates every 1 or 2 weeks, we just learned so much and tested so many different ideas. And that kind of approach is still very much what we're about as a company, which is growth through kind of hypothesis-driven growth. So coming up with ideas and experiments, and then running in a very quick and cheap way a test to see whether or not that improves performance. And so that's kind of, it was a necessity at the beginning to build the business, but that's now become kind of our core value proposition, is this, growth through experimentation.
So let's understand this. You had effectively built a company originally as a consultancy, which you were consulting to clients, and you were showing them how this was done, and then maybe you needed to start outsourcing because maybe there was a higher value projects and stuff which you could outsource to people which, maybe you didn't need to be doing. So that was developing, your portfolio of clients was developing. But then there's this moment where you got a Startup Weekend. So how does that work? Because were you actually developing your own IP at the stage? You have your own code, your own platform. So I'm wondering how Startup Weekend received that, that community, because they're used to people coming with apps rather than people optimizing apps.
Right. So, it was open for application. I think I put forward one of many different ideas that I kind of had on hand. But, really the main motivation for me was I really wanted to meet people. I wanted to find people that potentially could join the team, and also just see, what is the Thai startup scene. It was really the first big event that I'd come across, in a couple of years that really brought together the startup scene, and it was really impressive to see, a room with I think it was 100 plus people there that were all passionate, startup people that were all doing their own thing separately, that obviously come together to do this event, but that were kind of like-minded, and it really showed to me that yes, there is a scene. But I think maybe at the time I hadn't realized that pretty much was the beginning of it. I felt that maybe I'd just been on the outside and I hadn't, really known how to find this kind of scene. But I think it was around the time Hub are opening. So I would have loved to have, when I was working remotely, to have been working from Hubba or one of these brilliant kind of co-working spaces. rather than working from Starbucks and home all the time. But it just wasn't there. And then around the time that we were actually getting round to opening our office, that's when Hubber opened its doors, and obviously they've been instrumental also in kind of building the kind of local ecosystem.
So this was 2011, which, put this into context, that was really early still. I mean, we still haven't seen any large exits in the Thai startup scene, but really in Southeast Asia generally. And, we are maybe only, like, in terms of the funding side, only 4 or 5 years into the startup scene in Southeast Asia. So when you were getting into that and establishing yourself, especially in a place like Thailand, which maybe would have been behind somewhere like Hong Kong or Singapore in the startup scene as well, you were there really at the early stages. So you were there at Startup Weekend in 2011. Mm-hmm. Did that confirm anything to you that this was the right place to be? Because now you were talking about going and building a team. So you needed to have access to the right talent. 100 people's fine, but you need to have a large pool of talent to work with, right? A large pool of cost-effective talent as well. So how did that go for you? Is this the sort of the genesis of you building the team from Startup Weekend onwards? How did that work?
Yeah, very much. I mean, I think I was very fortunate to have picked the team to work with there. So obviously, the format for Startup Weekend, everyone pitches, and then you kind of self-select which team based around the ideas that interest you. And actually, 2 of the people on the team now make up the 3 of us of the management team of AppSynth, and still work with another 2 of the people on that team. So it really, more than I could have hoped, helped, me meet the people that have helped, us really build this business. But then also just meet everyone else who's part of the scene and our friends and other kind of people that we collaborate with, and really, just confirming that there really was the beginnings of a very exciting and healthy local scene.
So there was 3 of you back then. Well, there's 1, and then there was 3. How big are you now?
We're actually just under 50. I think 49 is the number now, which includes a couple based back in the UK, and 47 here now. 47.
How does that break down? Are they all developers, or what? What's the sort of complement of your staff?
Yeah, so roughly half are developers, and then all the kind of supporting roles that go with that. So QAs for testing, project managers, then we have our kind of growth management team. So people that are experts in user acquisition, engagement, analytics, monetization, and kind of our sales biz dev guys. So it's quite a mix, and we always try and have kind of a cross-functional team, or forgetting designers of course, and try and have a real cross-functional team on all projects. So, kind of our mission is, we want to help industry leaders be leaders on mobile, and that means, caring about the outcomes of the apps we build and helping to drive the strategy that makes that happen. So having these kind of growth marketers as part of every team so that they can actually talk about those things at the very beginning and not have kind of marketing as an afterthought.
So where are these people coming from? Are they local Thais? Are they people that have, like yourself, moved out to Thailand to check it out and maybe stuck around a while? Have you recruited people and brought people into Thailand specifically? Mm-hmm. I'm just curious, because the reason I say this, Bob, is because one of the conversations we had on the radio show is about, what makes a great startup ecosystem. Obviously, when everybody talks about startup ecosystems, they talk about Silicon Valley, and, every country wants to have their own silicon whatever and replicate what happened in Silicon Valley. But one of the conversations Michael and myself had, and Michael lives in Thailand as well, is that, maybe you don't need to replicate Silicon Valley, because maybe what brings people to a place like Thailand is something different. It's more, maybe there's a lifestyle choice in there as well, which maybe they can't get in San Francisco and so on. So I'm curious to know about, the people that you brought to Thailand, and, what kind of triggers there were for that.
Yeah, so, our team is more than half Thai, but for the kind of expats who have joined our team, there's a few who have moved specifically, and I think it's exactly what you said, that the people know that they want to come to Thailand, and it's not because they know there's a hot startup scene. I mean, they want to get involved when they know it exists, but it's probably not the first thing that made them think of coming to Asia or Thailand specifically. And I think, we've had some people who've maybe traveled around and then decided Thailand was the place they liked the most, or others who actually have never been, who just see it as a kind of an adventure. And that's great as well, because you kind of, I mean, obviously, as someone also living here, the early days are super exciting, and now the craziness of Bangkok is so normal, and going back to London's exciting because it's just different. But to experience again through someone else's eyes those first kind of moments, and I think it's really great. So we've had people join us from Austria, Australia, Belarus, others from the UK, from the US. We've got a good mix, and I think that's something we definitely want to encourage and be even more open to and receptive, because I think it's just good to have that mix of perspectives and experience. I think it's good for also just mixing with the local team. It's hopefully makes it a fun place to work.
I like what you say about getting accustomed to the craziness of Bangkok. Now that's normal for you. Imagine you have friends or family who come out to Thailand or Bangkok, and you're obviously based there. You show them around, or people that maybe from college that come out. Now I want to know, how did they experience it? So people people have a lot of expectations about what Thailand is and what it isn't. Mm-hmm. And not a lot of that is based around business, is it? I mean, people obviously understand it as a backpacking destination and so on. But when you talk about Thailand as a place for business, maybe more so for your generation, it makes sense. But especially my generation, it was completely, out of our, concept of what was possible, right? Mm-hmm. But even for your generation, I know even people graduating as well now, it's like Thailand, I still don't think it's sort of like the go-to destination for people, starting a business. So people must go there with some kind of expectations. How do you see that? What sort of things do you find when people come to Thailand for the first time? Are there any sort of things that blow them away, or any kind of expectations which are common, which, they have challenged as soon as they get there? What do you find when people go there for the first time now?
Yeah, I mean, it varies. Some people are a bit more clued up than others, but I've definitely seen some people who are just shocked by how developed and built up and high-rise the city is. And, that's it was no surprise to me, but just some people have a completely kind of uninformed impression of Thailand being, quite underdeveloped. And so actually, when people come and they see how modern and kind of clued up, certainly in Bangkok, and how similar a lot of it, the kind of level of development is to Western markets, they're kind of shocked by that. I think people are surprised by it not being as cheap as they expected. I think a lot of people, maybe who have been 10 plus years ago when it was a lot cheaper. I think it was the month I moved here, the baht dropped from being like 70 baht to the pound to about 50. So just before, all my planning and everything I thought was based on that higher value. So I think it used to be very cheap, and I think some people get a bit shocked when they come here and go to some of the nicer places, and they're like, oh, it's more expensive than London. So I think just some things around that. I think most people, there's always that shock of first day in Bangkok, and I think people always can't really understand how I could spend 9 years here. They find it so full on, but obviously it's not like that when you're doing your normal life. You're not whizzing around in tuk-tuks the whole time, and it's right. Slightly different.
Do you feel comfortable there? Do you consider it home? Do you see it as a place that you could stay, if nothing changed, for the next 20 years?
I mean, I definitely think of it as home. I think if it ever wasn't, it would always be my second home. I think, the adventure that it was when I moved here, I think, I always have that kind of still in me, and the idea of at some point in the future living somewhere else completely different is also very interesting. But I'm fully committed on what I'm doing now. That's not something for the short term, but it could be either interesting to, in the future, take the business elsewhere, or just something for kind of later life. But wherever I end up, I'm sure Thailand will be the place I'll be kind of coming back to a couple of times a year, because it's I think it feels more like home now than going back to the UK.
Yeah, so I wonder if people listening to your story, they may be thinking of moving to a place like Bangkok or Southeast Asia, and they may be based in a place like London, so they may be used to certain things which they just expect in their life. Do you live in Bangkok in a way that you could live just in London? I'm just trying to think about your daily life. I want people to try and kind of picture it, because you run a successful company in Bangkok. You manage a lot of people. So you've established yourself. I imagine you're quite comfortable. You know the city very well because you've been there long enough, and you have probably built up a very good network of people there as well. Mm-hmm. So do you live a life which is equivalent to how you'd be living if you were in London now? Just let people understand. Maybe you can kind of give us some examples of how it just feels as if it was living in a developed, if I can use that word, city elsewhere in the world.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, cost of living is less, so I think you can have a nicer place. And certainly at the age of, moving out here. When I first moved out here, I was in my London house. It was a shared house with several other people. And when I first came to Bangkok, I was thinking, I need to find a shared house. And then you realize, oh no, I actually, for what I was paying for a room, I can have a pretty nice condo on my own, and just things like that. So obviously the cost of living, I'd say it's somewhere where you can obviously do it a lot cheaper, but you can also spend just as much as back home. So I'd say it's got that full range. But if you want to eat for 50p or 25 baht a meal, you can do it, or you can spend the same as you would in any other Western market. I think I certainly wouldn't be eating out as much as you do here. I mean, that's just the normal thing. Back home you're always cooking, and it's just that's the normal kind of lifestyle. I think here there's a lot more outdoor, just kind of catching up with people for food, and it's a bit more of a regular thing to eat out. I don't think it's so different though. I mean, I'm not like living the high life here, and there I would be completely different. I think it's just it's all balance, and I definitely enjoy going back there now, catching up on music and things like that, which I was obviously so passionate about in the past, and not really being spoilt for choice here for kind of live stuff. So I actually think it's best. The ideal thing is a bit of both, and I think the first few years where I didn't go back much, you could potentially lose touch a little bit, and I've been going back a little bit more now since we kind of hired a couple of people there, so having legitimate work reasons to go back as well, and I think it's been good both on a personal and a business level.
So there must be people listening who are tuning into your story, Bob, and thinking, yeah, I want to do that. That sounds awesome. I want to do what you've done. Maybe they're coming out of university, or maybe like yourself, they're not even going to university, and they're deciding start a record label in Thailand, or whatever it is, aged 18, whatever the challenge may be. Stories like yours will be the inspiration to go and do something and make change in their life and step outside their comfort zone as well, which you've demonstrated is completely possible. So I'm curious, advice that you may have for people in that situation. If I was a younger Bob, whether I'm 18, starting my record label, or whether I'm thinking of heading to Thailand to go and find my fame and fortune, whatever it may be, would you sit down with me and advise me and give me some advice that may help me avoid the mistakes that you may have made? Get up that learning curve a bit quicker, maybe sort of set my expectations in the right way. How would you do that? Because I imagine people have already asked you this question already. I want to come to Thailand. What do I do? This kind of thing. Mm-hmm. Help us out here. Give us some advice.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people turn up without any idea of what they want to do. They just know they want to be here, and I actually think that's fine. And I think going to there's so many these days. I mean, if you are looking to get into something involving tech, there's so many meetups that I think it's going to be a lot easier to go and find something that you're interested in, and it's probably going and joining a startup with other people already doing it is probably what I'd recommend. I mean, I think it's pretty hard to go it alone and do it the way I started. And I think, you know, having also done a startup on the side which came out of Startup Weekend, and having, you know, a big group of co-founders, that was actually, I think in the early days, really important, because you get the moral support, you obviously get to share the burden, you get to bounce ideas off people, and I think I'd say it's pretty hard to just do it alone, and you know, because it was a couple of years before even having anyone as part of the team, and so I think if I was to start again, I would definitely want to start with another couple of people and actually feel, you know, as part of a founding team rather than just an individual. I think I learned so much so I've only had kind of a proper job employed by someone else for 3 years of my life, but I learned so much on those as well. And I think, you know, still there was things that I've had to learn because maybe I didn't progress longer in that kind of environment. So I think that was invaluable. So I probably wouldn't necessarily go straight from graduating to doing your first startup. You know, maybe just even a year working for someone else or working as part of another team that's already doing stuff quite well, then you're going to learn so much from that. So I think
that's great advice, by the way. I think that's the often unspoken advice, because people feel the pressure to go and start their own thing, isn't it? But even if you were to go to work a year or 2 years, they bankroll your education, really, your employer. And even if you hate it, then you learn what you don't like, right? I mean, you don't know
exactly.
If you start a business and you don't know what the alternative is, right? So to have that experience.
So I'd say, yes, half the things that I think I learned are the things that I thought they did well, and then the other half is the things that you don't want to replicate. So it's and I guess if you work in more than one role in different companies, you're obviously going to learn that more and more. But at least having experience from one company, you know, now having such a large team, obviously management is something that I'm kind of by nature need to be doing, but not having had the opportunity or training in another role around that, you obviously have to self-learn. I'd say, you know, just being disciplined in kind of reading a lot of books, because I think as soon as you start getting busy, you know, you can perhaps end up with your head down a bit and doing too much of the work yourself. And I think, you know, trying to make sure that you're still learning the whole time, I think is important. I think if I was to start the business again, I would definitely start by thinking about processes that other people can do, because I think the problem is often when you start a business or you start hiring, it's because you're a doer. So if you're a graphic designer and you've got you know, a steady stream of business and more than you can handle, you hire more designers because you know, there's enough work to go around. But then the bigger you get, the less design actually you get to do. So if it's your passion and actually all I love doing is design, then maybe starting a design business isn't the right thing for you, because in the end you actually do very little of what you love and you end up managing a team of people doing the design. But obviously if that's the intention and you're getting into it because you want to be planning the strategy and the operations and not actually doing the work, then I think it's also being quite disciplined and not doing that, because certainly in the early days and even sometimes now you get kind of pulled into doing certain things on client projects because it's needed. But you know, just having the discipline and planning things in a way that keeps you focused on the higher level stuff, I think is really important.
Great advice. Bob Gallagher, everybody, the founder of AppSynth. Bob, before you go, I'm going to ask you a couple of questions. One is very important, which is, you know, where people can find out more about you, but just hold that thought for a minute. One less important, but just very curious, Thai hip-hop, yes or no?
Not yet.
Right, okay, it's good to know. You heard it here first, because he would know, if anybody did know, if that was a scene worth looking out for. Okay, so let's talk about where people could find out more about yourself.
Sure. So for the business, it's appsynth.net, AppSynth.net. And I mean, you can find me on LinkedIn. Bob Gallagher shouldn't be too hard to find.
Excellent. We'll put all the details in the show notes. Bob, it's been a real inspiration. I think people listening to your story will maybe hear what they need to hear to make them make a change in their lives and take the first step to go out to a place like Thailand. It doesn't have to be Thailand, it could be anywhere in the world, but to go and do something like that, because they realise that, you know, they're going to make mistakes, but failure isn't fatal. And like yourself, you've learned from these mistakes, and, you know, that's all been part of your story. So thank you so much for coming onto the show today, Bob, and sharing your story with us. It was a real inspiration.
Thank you very much, Graham. It's been great.
You've been listening to Asia Tech Podcast. Find out more at www.asiatechpodcast.com.